The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler. February 11th, Our Lady of Lourdes. On February 11th, 1858, three girls, Bernadette Soubirous, 14 years old, her sister Marie Toinette, 11, and her friend Jean Abadie, 12, left their home in Lourdes to gather firewood. To reach a place on the banks of the Gave River, where they had been told they would find an abundance of dry branches, they had to pass a natural grotto in the Massabielle rocks that bordered the riverbed, after crossing a stream whose current moved the wheel of a mill. The two younger girls waded through the stream, shrieking because the water was very cold. Bernadette, who, unlike her companions, wore stockings because of her delicate health, she suffered from asthma, did not dare to imitate them. However, when the other two refused to help her pass, she began to take off her stockings. As she was doing so, she heard the sound of rustling next to her, like that produced by a gust of wind. She raised her head and saw that the little trees on the other bank were still. Only she thought she noticed a slight movement in the weeds growing in front of the grotto, very close to her, on the other side of the stream. She took her mind off the matter, finished taking off her stockings, and was about to put one foot in the water when the whisper was repeated. This time she stared into the grotto and saw the branches of the brambles waving outside, but also in a niche inside the cave, behind and above the branches, was the figure of a young woman dressed in white, no taller than me, greeting me with slight tilts of her head, as Bernadette later said. The apparition was very beautiful. The young woman wore a white tunic girded by a blue sash and carried a long rosary hanging from her arm. When Bernadette knelt down, took her rosary out of the bag and began to recite it. Then the apparition took the rosary in her hands and began to pass the beads, praying, but without moving her lips. They did not speak to each other, but at the end of the 5 mysteries, the figure smiled and, retreating into the shadows of the grotto, disappeared. The other 2 girls returned from gathering firewood and burst out laughing at the sight of Bernadette on her knees. Jean reproached her for not helping them gather dry branches and then climbed up on the rocks, running to the other side of the grotto, but Marie Toinette approached her sister. "You're kind of scared," she said. "Did you see something that frightened you?" Bernadette told her everything, on the promise that she would not repeat it to anyone. However, Toinette told her mother as soon as they returned home. Madame Soubirous questioned Bernadette. "You fooled yourself, little girl," she told her. "You must have seen a stone." "No," the girl replied. "She was a young girl and had a very beautiful face." The mother concluded that perhaps it was a soul from purgatory and forbade her daughter to return to the grotto. For the next 2 days, Bernadette stayed at home, but many children from the neighborhood, who had heard about the event, pestered her to return to the grotto. Mrs. Soubirous, exasperated, sent her daughter to ask Father Pomian for advice, who paid no attention. Then the lady recommended Bernadette to talk to her father, who, after some hesitation, authorized her to go. Several girls set out on the road to the grotto, carrying a bottle of holy water, and when they arrived, they all knelt down to pray the rosary. When they were on the 3rd mystery, the same young white girl appeared in the same place as before. To put it in Bernadette's own words, "There she is. I said to the one who was closest to me, and I put my arm around her shoulders, pointing to the young white girl, but she saw nothing." Another girl, named Marie Hilot, gave her the holy water, and getting up, she threw some drops towards the vision. The figure smiled and made the sign of the cross. Bernadette spoke to it. "If you come from God, come closer." The figure took a step forward. At that moment, Jean Abadie, with other girls, climbed the rocks of the grotto and threw a stone that fell at Bernadette's feet. The vision disappeared, but Bernadette knelt down again and remained motionless, as if in a trance, her eyes fixed on the grotto. Her companions could not move her. With difficulty, the miller Nicholas and his wife lifted the little girl up and carried her down the slope to the mill, where she suddenly came to herself and wept bitterly. Soon many people gathered there, and Bernadette's mother began to scold her daughter, whereupon they all quietly withdrew and returned to Lourdes. None of those who knew Bernadette, not even the nuns who taught her catechism, believed what she was saying. Some were of the opinion that what she had seen was a soul from purgatory. The 3rd apparition took place on February 18th, when a lady named Millet and her daughter, who belonged to the Congregation of the Daughters of Mary, took Bernadette to the grotto early one morning. They brought with them a blessed candle, pen, and ink. The three knelt down to pray, and when Bernadette murmured that the figure was there, Madame Millet's daughter handed her pen, paper, and ink. "If you come from God, please tell me what you want. If not, go away," said Bernadette. When Madame Millet merely smiled, the girl added, holding out the paper and pen, "Please write your name and what you want." Then the apparition spoke for the first time using the patois, dia reading, of Lourdes. "There is no need for me to write what I have to say. Would you be so kind as to come here every day for 2 weeks? After a pause, she added, "I do not promise to make you happy in this life, but I promise to make you happy in the next." And rising to the roof of the grotto, she disappeared. On Sunday, February 21st, a large number of people accompanied her to the grotto, including Dr. Dozus, a skeptical physician who took the girl's pulse and examined her breathing during the trance. The apparition spoke again. "You will pray to God for sinners," he recommended. After the High Mass, Bernadette went to visit the imperial procurator, J.V. Dutour, who interrogated her at length and came to the conclusion that the little girl was sincere, but she was obsessed. After Vespers, the police commissioner, Dominic Jacomet, sent for her and subjected her to a very severe interrogation and later dismissed her with a warning to stay away from the grotto or face the consequences. Those officials considered that the conduct of the little girl disturbed public order and, moreover, had observed that the grounds where the grotto was located offered very little security for the large crowds that were to gather there. On the 22nd, Bernadette went to the grotto, in spite of the prohibition. There was a small group of citizens and 2 gendarmes there, but the apparition did not take place. On the same day, Father Pomian, Bernadette's confessor, declared that if the procurator Dutour, the highest authority in the place, had not forbidden the young woman to go to the grotto, she could go whenever she wanted. At 6 o'clock in the morning of the 23rd, Bernadette arrived at the place, and a crowd of 200 people was already there. That time she saw the apparition again and fell into a trance that lasted almost an hour. The next day, the crowd had increased to 400 or 500 people, and again Bernadette had an hour of ecstasy when the apparition manifested itself, but she refused to reveal anything the lady had said. On Thursday the 25th, after praying a mystery of the Rosary, Bernadette began to advance on her knees up the slope that ascended to the cave, gently pushing aside the foliage. When she reached the bottom of the grotto, she turned around without getting up and advanced in the opposite direction. Then she stopped to look inquisitively toward the niche, stood up, and walked to the left side of the cavity. What Bernadette herself relates is this. "Go drink at the fountain and wash in its waters," the lady told her. As Bernadette did not know that there was a fountain in the crags of the cave, she turned to approach the river. But then the lady spoke again to explain. "She herself pointed with her finger," said the young girl, "to show me where the spring was. I walked there, but I could only find a little pool of dirty water. I put my hands in, but could not get enough water to drink. I began to dig, and water came out, but it was cloudy. 3 times I pulled it out with my hands and threw it out. Then it was safe to drink." The people saw that the girl bent down, and when she stood up, her face was dirty with mud. Again she bent down, and it seemed that she was nibbling the leaves of a plant. Moments later she straightened up and began to walk towards Lourdes. At first the people were scornful and even derisive, but later that day they were all astonished to see that a spring of muddy water had gushed out of the grotto and flowed into the Gave. Within a week, the spring was producing 27,000 gallons, 102,200 liters, per day, as it continues to do to this day. On February 26th, 800 witnesses saw Bernadette, in a trance, crawling up the slope of the grotto, frequently bending down to kiss the ground and beckoning, as if inviting others to imitate her. The apparition had advised penance. The visions of the 27th and 28th followed the usual course, although the crowd grew larger. Bernadette repeatedly bowed to kiss the ground, and the people imitated her. On the afternoon of the 28th, she was brought before a magistrate who gave her the same warnings. By the 1st of March, the number of spectators had increased to 1,000, and for the first time a priest was present. The parish priest of Lourdes and the 4 parish priests had declared that they had nothing to do with the grotto of Massabielle, but Abbot Desirat came from distant districts and was not under the jurisdiction of Lourdes. This priest was very impressed. A healing took place at the spring that day, but the news was not reported until months later. On March 2nd at 7 a.m., 1,700 people were present when Bernadette saw the apparition for the 13th time. On that occasion, the lady begged her to let the clergy know of her desire to have a chapel built and a procession held. Bernadette went to see the priest, who received her coldly, dismissed her with curt words, and intimated to the civil officials that he personally disapproved of the whole question of the apparitions. March 3rd was a day of great disappointment and scorn for Bernadette. To the 4,000 people who had come, she had to confess her failure because the lady had not appeared. But that same day, when most of the spectators had departed, she returned to the grotto, saw the apparition, and went into a trance for a short time. On March 4th, in front of thousands of spectators, she again had the vision, went into a trance, but there was no news. 14 days had passed and the lady did not appear again. But on March 25th, the day of the Virgin, Bernadette visited the grotto between 4 and 5 in the morning. The lady appeared and told her to come closer. Bernadette then asked her, "Would you be so kind as to tell me who you are?" The little girl repeated the question twice more, and then the lady folded her hands, raised her eyes to heaven, and answered in pate, "Que soy era Immaculate Conception, I am the Immaculate Conception." Then she continued speaking, "I wish to have a chapel built for me here." Bernadette replied, "I have already told them what you want, but they ask for a miracle as proof of your desire." The lady smiled again, and without adding a word, vanished from Bernadette's sight. The penultimate of the apparitions took place on April 7th. A crowd of 1,200 to 1,300 people watched Bernadette in a trance for 3/4 of an hour. Dr. Dozu was at her side and noted that the girl raised her hands with interlaced fingers and placed them over the flame of the candle burning in front of her. She watched the flame caress her fingers and seep between them, without the girl seeming to notice. Not only was she insensitive to pain, but the tissues of her skin were not affected by the fire, nor was she left with any scars. When she came to herself from her trance, the doctor brought the lighted candle close to the girl's left hand, and she hastily withdrew it, exclaiming, "It burns me!" It must be admitted, however, that Father Cross, in his Histoire de Notre-Dame de Lourdes, gives reasons that discredit this statement. In any case, the Episcopal Commission that examined and reported the evidence of the apparitions did not take it very much into account. The 18th and last apparition occurred on July 16th, Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. By that time, the grotto was fenced off from the public, and Bernadette could only see the top of the niche over the fences and from the opposite bank of the Gave River. However, the figure did not seem farther away than the other times. After that date, Bernadette Soubirous never again had visions of the Blessed Virgin during the 21 years she still lived. No one but her was granted the privilege of these visions. It is appropriate to add a few words by way of commentary on 2 points related to the apparitions of the Blessed Virgin at Lourdes. Some hostile critics tried to make people believe that the supernatural manifestations had been organized by the clergy from Rome for the purpose of confirming and popularizing the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, which just 4 years earlier had been defined by Pope Pius IX. The erroneousness of these criticisms can be proved by remembering that it was the reports of the witnesses collected by the local authorities and submitted to the attention of the Prefecture of the Department of Lourdes and the French Ministry of the Interior, which gave rise to the story, without the clergy or the church getting involved at all in the alleged apparitions, until faith had deeply rooted them in the people and the strange coincidence of the birth of a spring in the grotto occurred, and people began to arrive there by the thousands from all the surrounding areas. Nor can anyone sincerely believe that the church authorities tried to popularize, as it was claimed, a Vatican-approved dogma by resorting to the imagination and superstition of the masses, and to top it all off, organized the fraud in a remote village lost in the Pyrenees, 100 kilometers from the nearest railway line. Moreover, all the acts in the subsequent life of Bernadette, the little impostor who would have served as an instrument of some cunning ecclesiastic, categorically disprove such a hypothesis. The girl never again had visions. It never occurred to her to embellish with new details the account she had given from the beginning. She never showed herself to be pleased or flattered by the attention paid to her, and she never obtained any pecuniary gain from it. Shunning the lure of fame and popularity, and retaining the simplicity of a child, Bernadette entered a religious order of nursing sisters in 1886 at the age of 22. She made her novitiate in Nevers, far from Lourdes, and remained there for 12 years until her death. She did not take part in any of the great construction works around the grotto, nor in the ceremonies of the consecration of the basilica. Secondly, it is necessary to call attention to a very remarkable fact that confirms the unique and supernatural character of Bernadette's visions. During her prolonged visits to the grotto, while she remained in a trance, with her eyes fixed on the apparition she saw so clearly, saying things to it that made the peasants who watched her weep with emotion, no one ever pretended to have seen what she contemplated. There was no collective hallucination, no scenes of disorder, no extravagances, screams, contortions, or any other display of exaltation. Instead, when Bernadette's series of visions had concluded, false visionaries began to appear everywhere, making repulsive demonstrations. The reports sent by the police commissioner to the prefecture on this matter are very clear. Some of the visionaries were truly pious and well-behaved young women, especially Marie Couric, the mayor's maid, recognized by all as a good young woman. Marie had visions from April to December of the same year, and many people believed her, but the difference between her raptures and those of Bernadette was very marked. Cross published the testimony of an unimpeachable witness to Marie's extravagances. If such aberrations occurred in women of good disposition and preparation, the reader can imagine what other indifferent and ignorant girls would do, as well as the young children who, in order to imitate their elders, also began to have visions. The pious citizens of Lourdes and the peasants of the neighboring villages, entirely convinced that the first apparitions in the grotto were authentic, were ready to offer any of their offspring as receptacles of divine inspiration. There is no doubt that sometimes these children were in a state of rapture, and there were even some who actually had hallucinations. As for the adult visionaries, apart from those mentioned, it can only be said that almost all of them made exhibitions of strange and repulsive phenomena, hysterical convulsions, gestures, contortions, etc. And of course, in all these cases, there was reason to suspect that it was a deliberate imposture.